The F06 BMW M6 is the easiest BMW M car to buy in 2023, but is it the most affordable? This is my 2015 BMW M6 Grand Coupe competition, and today I'm going to explain to you everything you need to know before buying one of these. First off, let me start by explaining what I mean by easiest to purchase M car in 2023. Now, obviously there are cheaper BMW M cars out on the market, such as an E36 M3 or even an E46 M3. Now, both of these cars would be cheaper than this here M6, but because they're over 10 years old and most of them have over 100,000 miles, getting a loan on one of these cars is extremely difficult, meaning that you either need to have most of or the entire price of the car up front in order to be able to make a purchase. Versus with something like an M6, for example, if you've got really good credit, you can get one of these things with no money out of pocket as long as you're willing to commit to a monthly payment. A monthly payment on one of these should stay in the 3 digits as long as your credit isn't terrible or as long as you're not looking at one that's an extremely high spec. Of the financeable M cars, I find that the M6 and the F10 M5 are the best bang for your buck cars in this category. Of course, another car that comes to mind is a non-competition M2, but remember, you're looking at paying 35 to 40 grand for a car that started at 55 to 60, versus with an M6, you're looking at purchasing a car that maybe started over $100,000 and is now under sometimes 30 grand. So that's what I mean by the easiest to buy M car in 2023. Now that we've gotten that explanation out of the way, let me go over my specific example of an M6. This is a 2015 M6 Grand Coupe with every single factory option, with the exception of the carbon ceramic brakes and the night vision system. On top of all of the factory options, it is also a full BMW individual car, finished in tanzanite blue metallic and featuring extended Amaro brown leather on the inside of the interior, which is my favorite part about the car by far. In addition to the factory equipment, this car also has CSF intercoolers, what I believe to be Project Gamma catless downpipes, AFE power air intakes, these 20-inch Vertini wheels, which I am not a fan of, a Stage 2 tune, which supposedly brings this car to 780 wheel horsepower on 91 octane, and an insanely expensive radar detector built into the factory mirror. The MSRP on this car would have been between $135,000 and $140,000 when it was new, but with 70,000 miles, I was able to pick this car up for $45,000 after a 6-month negotiation with the seller, who originally wanted over 50 grand for this car. Now granted, I did get a discount on the car compared to where it was originally priced at, but I do still feel like I overpaid for this car just a little bit, somewhere in the range of about 5 to 8%. Granted, I was willing to take the risk because of the spec on this car. The tanzanite blue on Amaro brown is just one of the craziest color combinations I've ever seen in person. Only other spec I would have preferred is the 1-of-1 British Racing green on Aragon brown leather, which is actually currently for sale for $80,000. If you're looking to pick up one of these M6s for a high mileage convertible, you can get them under $30,000, but for most well-sorted coupes and Grand Coupes, expect to pay anywhere from $35,000 all the way up to over 50 grand for a really nice one. Let's address the elephant in the room. The F-chassis M6 and the F10 M5 have become such great deals because of their reliability concerns. Now listen, I'm not gonna get into all the nitty-gritty about all the little small issues that might happen, because most of us are willing to ignore those. Especially in this current economy where virtually every single M car is now becoming completely out of reach. Now, the main thing that I see people concerned about with these cars is the engine, more specifically, catastrophic engine failure. If you've ever done any research about these cars whatsoever, you will find tons of forum posts of people talking about blowing up their engines. Stock cars, modified cars, well-serviced cars, not serviced cars, doesn't seem to matter. These things like to explode. However, what's interesting to me is that the thing that causes this engine to fail is also the same thing that causes virtually every other BMW engine to fail, and all of those cars are still priced pretty much right at their original MSRPs, whereas this one is falling off the depreciation cliff. What's the deal? That main item being rod bearings. Without getting too technical, because I am not a mechanic and I actually have no idea what I'm talking about, rod bearings are a piece inside your engine that more or less keeps everything moving the way that it's supposed to. These cars are notorious for burning oil, so what happens is if the bearing doesn't have enough oil on it, it will begin to wear on the inside. Once it fails, the rod that it is connected to usually comes out the bottom of your engine, blowing up everything in its way. Now, the only other thing that I've ever seen take out one of these engines is in extremely early model year cars, meaning 2013s and 2014s, and their fuel injectors will occasionally get stuck open, flooding the engine completely. But if you're staying away from 2013 and 2014s, you should be okay. So you're looking to buy a 2015 or newer M6, you don't have to worry about the fuel injectors, but what about these rod bearings? Well, if you followed the BMW community for any amount of time, you'll know that anybody that's ever recommended someone to buy an E92 M3 or an E46 M3 or an E60 M5 always recommends that you change out the rod bearings first after purchasing the vehicle. This is mostly to give you peace of mind and to breathe a little bit of extra life into your engine. Now, my question is, why can't you just replace the rod bearings on this thing? Wouldn't that be the exact same fix? So I went to one of my local shops and I got a quote for it, and turns out it's a little bit more than an E92 M3, but it's really not that much. And the thing with an E92 M3 is that most of them are now over 10 years old and they're more expensive than an M6. So if you were to purchase an E92 M3 instead of this here M6, not only would you have a higher financial obligation, both in the amount of money that you have to put down up front and in the amount of money that you're going to pay per month, but now you're also gonna have to spend several $1,000s replacing the rod bearings anyway, which is something you'd have to do on this one as well. So I guess for me, I'm a little bit confused as to why rod bearing replacement is acceptable part of the process for an E92 M3 and an E46 M3, but when it comes to somebody potentially wanting to buy one of these cars, oh no, you can't buy it because the rod bearings might fail. If you're really that concerned about it, replace the rod bearings. Bada bing, bada boom. I assure you that any amount of money that you spend in preventative maintenance on an M6 is not going to bring your total financial commitment anywhere close to what it would be if you bought one of these things brand new. Keep in mind, this is a $140,000 car. With today's interest rates, you'd be paying what the cost of the rod bearings job is every single month just to own this. Oh, but you get warranty. You're still spending $3,000 a month on a car. So bottom line is, if you're concerned about the reliability on these, I'd recommend just replacing the rod bearings right after you buy the car. Furthermore, I would also recommend you getting the car inspected. Now, I had this car inspected after I bought the car, but most intelligent people get inspections done before they buy the car. Luckily, my car had a clean bill of health outside of a leaking transmission pan and a check engine light due to some small fuel tank related issue, both of which are not massive deals. In addition to the inspection though, I also had my oil changed and sampled. The shop I used collected the oil into a bottle, and then I poured that oil into a free test kit from Blackstone Laboratories. Blackstone Laboratories is this really cool company that will actually take your oil and analyze it to see what percentage of it contains any metals from inside the engine or potentially any ingredients from coolant indicating you have a bad head gasket. I sent out my oil report and it looks like everything on this car is wearing exactly the way that it should be. There is no abnormally high count of any metals or any type of coolant ingredients in my oil, meaning that more likely than not, this car has got plenty of miles left in it. However, I'm gonna continue to change the oil between every 3,000 and 5,000 miles, and I'm gonna send a sample out with every oil change just to keep up to date with everything. If you do this and you make sure that you warm the car up properly before giving it the beans, I don't see any reason why these S63TU engines can't reach 100,000 miles, if not even exceed that. Okay, you're briefed on all the potential headaches about this car and you're still ready to move forward. What is this thing like to drive? Now, ultimately, my main point of comparison here is going to be an F80 M3 because that's the only other M car that I've ever actually owned. Now, despite the F80 and this M6 being from the same generation, these cars could not be more unlike each other. Now, at the time of buying the F80 M3, it was both the nicest car I'd ever had and the fastest car I'd ever had at the same time. This car has now taken its place, but this car is so nice on the inside that it's almost impossible not to notice it, whereas with the F80, you're a little more concerned with what's going on outside of the car. I wouldn't say the luxuriousness on the inside of this is distracting per se, it's just so much nicer inside that anytime you look around anywhere on the interior, you're looking at something that's high quality and it just feels good. Now that's not to say that the F80 isn't a nice car, it definitely is an extremely nice car, it just doesn't have the opulence and excessiveness that this car does, especially with the full Amaro brown interior. Another thing I appreciate about this car over the F80 is that this car is extremely satisfying to drive like a normal citizen. You've got massage seats, which are a bit of a gimmick unfortunately, the cooled seats which work great, heated seats, heated steering wheel, the Bang & Olufsen system is absolutely phenomenal. If you just want to cruise at or even below the speed limit and just relax, this car is the perfect automobile for that. The F80 on the other hand, you want to drive that thing at 10/10ths all the time. Every corner you want to drift, every freeway on-ramp you want to send it to the moon. That car kind of just begs you to go fast all the time. Now that's not to say that the M6 isn't fast. This is undeniably one of the dumbest, fastest cars I've ever driven in my entire life. The only thing I can think of to compare it to is I did drive a full bolt-on R35 GTR that was on E85 a couple of years ago, and I remember being equally as frightened by that car. I appreciate that the M6 is level-headed when you want it to be. Both the F80 and this M6 put their power down very well for the power that they have. The M6, however, is just considerably worse at putting the power down. Like I mentioned before, this particular car, according to the seller, makes 780 wheel horsepower on pump gas. I have seen the traction light flash as high as 4th gear at 80 miles an hour. Fast isn't even the right way to describe this car. Until about 60-80 miles an hour, it's fairly useless. It spins a lot of tire, makes a lot of cool noises. You hit 80 miles an hour and this thing, it just enters warp speed. Now, I'm not here to flex on anybody. This car is way too fast for me, so most of the time, I'm driving it with traction control on. And truthfully, that's part of what makes it so fun. The power doesn't stop getting cut until you reach about 80 miles an hour. So once you cross that threshold and it gives you all 800 horsepowers, it's literally like launching a Model 3 Performance from 0 miles an hour, except you're already going 80. Seriously, the speed in which the needle moves past 80 miles an hour is actually just the craziest thing I've ever seen. However, it is very fast, but it's also very big. This thing can be a bit of a handful to get through parking lots, and you do feel the weight, especially when you're boogieing on some canyons. It actually does turn in fairly well, but I will say that you do notice the weight the most every single time you hit a bump. If you're going through a tight canyon turn and you hit a little divot in the road, the force that this thing hits the ground again when it finally lands from catching air, or at least expanding the suspension like that, it's this huge like boof. It's not necessarily like stiff and uncomfortable, you can feel the force of all 4,200 pounds of this car smacking the ground. So it's not as confidence-inspiring as an F80, whose suspension rebounds and settles a little bit quicker than this one does. Now you'd think with everything that I had just said that I would consider the M6 to be a much better daily than an F80 M3. Hell no! Listen, this is my first V8 car. I've never owned a V8 in my entire life, and I've seen tons of videos of people complaining about their gas mileage, and I always thought that they were being a little bit dramatic. Oh no, this is bad. Like, it's so bad. Right now I'm currently averaging 9 miles per gallon in the city and about 13 to 14 miles per gallon on the highway. Here in lovely, expensive Southern California, it costs me about $100 to put a full tank of gas in this thing. If I'm driving in the city, I will be lucky to maybe get 200 miles out of a full tank. If I'm doing nothing but freeway driving, I could probably squeeze about 360-ish out of it. But you don't really realize the difference between 9 miles per gallon and like 15 to 18 miles per gallon until you have a car that gets the 9 miles per gallon. I don't even daily this car and I fill it up like twice a week. It truly is the least efficient vehicle I have ever driven or owned in my entire life. But moral of the story, these cars are just different. They're gonna be very similar in terms of cost. An F80 is probably gonna cost you more upfront than an M6 will, but an F80 is probably gonna cost you less in maintenance. That's just me being honest. The F80's real only downfall is the crank hub, which is arguably not even an actual issue, but even if it is, it's a few $1,000s again, just like fixing rod bearings, and you'll probably never have any mechanical issues with an F80 ever again. Whereas with this, I bought this car knowing full well that it could be a full-blown mechanical nightmare. However, I wanted to see if it was taken care of and if I did all the necessary preventative maintenance, if one of these F chassis M6s or if an F10 M5 could actually be a good buy in 2023. So if you want something that's going to be a little bit cheaper up front and a lot nicer to drive on a day-to-day basis, the M6 might be the car for you. If you want something that's a little more aggressive, a little more violent, a little more in your face and tossable, an F80 M3 might be the choice for you. I know I'm not really great at uploading consistently, but be sure to hit that subscribe button and hit the notification bell, as I'm gonna try to do as many update videos on this car as I own it as I possibly can. When I was looking for this car, I noticed that there is a huge lack of high quality content on YouTube centered around the M6. You've got Jay Whips out in New York who does the POV videos, but other than that, I don't really think there's any creators right now making content centered around an M6. And his content is a lot more focused around the driving aspect of it, where I want to focus on, can you reasonably purchase one of these M6s without being able to afford the car when it was brand new? That's the saying that everybody throws around, right? If you can't buy the used car at the price it was new, then you probably can't afford that used car. Well, I can't afford a $140,000 car, but I can afford a $45,000 car. So if you'd like to see if this journey goes absolutely terribly for me, be sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell. To close it out, again, whether you choose this or you choose an F80, you're gonna get an awesome car. Just make sure you're buying something German and it'll be a good choice. Thank you guys for watching. I'll see you later.